Hi, I'm Meta Spencer, and today we're going to Germany, but we're going by way of California because my friend Bill Fletcher is in California, and he has some thoughts that he wants to share with us about the progress that the Germans are making in solving global warming. But he has some preliminary comments that he wants to make. So, by all means, good morning, Bill. How are you?
I'm great, and thanks for having me back. I always enjoy these conversations. Well, Meta, a couple of things. If we're going to talk about Germany, Craig Smith, my co-author, and I did have a section in our book discussing the unique problems of various countries that are trying to reach net zero, and Germany was one of them. And I would present Germany in a very positive light in the sense that they are trying very hard to do the right thing. So I think that Germany definitely deserves an A for effort, and we'll get into that. But I think when you talk about Germany, there's a couple of things that I think we have to put in perspective. Germany is trying to develop energy independence using renewables, solar and wind. They're trying to eliminate their use of coal, which is their only domestic natural resource, energy resource. They import all of their gas and all of their oil. So they're trying to do something I think is very difficult and maybe suboptimal, and I'll get into what I mean by that. Because Germany, when you look at, I've spent a lot of time in Germany over the years on business. I haven't been there in quite a while, but I used to go there regularly. And first of all, Germany is a very northern climate. I mean, Berlin is up around the same latitude as Calgary or Winnipeg. So in a sense, when you're talking about a country that's as far north as the southern part of Canada, or certainly further north than the New England states or Wisconsin, where I used to live for a while. And so they don't have a lot of sunshine like Spain, let's say. And also its climate is very, there's a lot of clouds, a lot of rain. It's not an ideal climate for solar, and they don't have a large windy coastline for wind turbines. So I would say that Germany is not well endowed, in many ways, as far as renewables are concerned, and they were not well endowed for fossil fuels either. Their only domestic source is coal. So with that background, Germany started out, and I still can't pronounce their program, but they had a program starting around 2000 to basically meet the European Union objectives for reducing fossil fuel emissions. And they've done a lot in the country to do that, and we can talk about that. Just to give you a quick preview, they've put a lot of effort into using renewables for electricity production, and also they put a lot of effort into energy efficiency. The other thing I think it's interesting to know is in 1990, West Germany had to absorb East Germany with the fall of the Soviet Union. And that in itself was a massive effort that preceded their efforts to phase out nuclear and become more dependent on renewables. So as a country, they've had some big challenges that they've had to deal with, and now we can talk about, with that sort of little background, what should Germany do, knowing that in my opinion, their endowment is modest as far as renewables are concerned, and that'll bring up an issue that I want to discuss as part of this talk.
What do you mean? It'll bring up an issue about whether renewables are.
Well, I mean, an issue. I think, like, I live in California, which is a state that is well endowed with solar and wind. We got over 1,000 miles of windy coastline. We got mountains, we got deserts, we got a lot of land for solar. We got lots of sunshine, and especially in the south. So California has an easy job in my mind compared to Germany as far as switching to renewables. A hypothesis I would have is Germany is not dependent upon domestic fossil fuels. They use a lot of coal for electricity generation, but they import essentially all of their oil and all of their gas. And their natural gas comes from Russia, mostly 1,000 miles away. The Nord Stream pipeline's over 1,000 miles long.
But I had to distract what you were
No,
saying.
no. I mean, these are good things. Yeah.
I've seen talk about it as kind of a pawn in the game. If they withheld permission, it would be a big blow to Russia, and it could be used politically or whatever. But this was a while back, and if the thing is signed, sealed, and delivered by now, then of course it's no longer something that could be withheld strategically. But I don't know how far along they are in how committed are they, and how is the pipeline being built, or where's that stand?
It's almost finished. Well, I mean, talking about that, they're talking about Nord Stream 2, because there is already a Nord Stream 1, and that's a pipeline that's over 1,000 miles long that goes from Russia across the Baltic Sea to Germany. And it's an underwater pipeline. It's a very long one, over 1,000 miles long, and they're building Nord Stream 2, and I think it's almost finished. I think there's maybe a couple hundred miles or something that is unfinished at this point. It's almost ready to go. And
excuse me, but is it oil, gas, or both?
Gas.
Just gas. Okay.
Yeah. And
where do they get the gas?
From Russia.
I mean, where in Russia?
I don't know exactly, but it's somewhere much into the interior of Russia. It's not around Moscow, but so and the whole purpose of the Nord Stream 1 and now Nord Stream 2 is to bypass the Ukraine, because Germany and Europe gets a lot of gas from Russia that crosses the Ukraine to get there, and the Ukraine gets a fee for that. And also Russia, because of their taking the Crimea and other things, they don't want to have, and Europe is worried about it as well, that gee, the Ukrainians could step on our hose basically, or stop our gas supply. So the Nord Stream 1 and now, which is already in operation, Nord Stream 2, which will double or triple the capacity, some number like that, which is another pipeline laid right alongside Nord Stream 1, would bypass the Ukraine and let Germany get gas directly from Russia. And geopolitically, with the US, that sort of bypasses the US sanctions on Russia because of their annexation of Crimea. So, if Russia gets a direct sale to Germany with their gas, and then it also increases Germany's dependence upon Russian gas. So that may, with NATO and other things, are saying, gee, that gives Russia some additional leverage. That dependence.
Well, if they want to do without, but it'd be kind of hard for the U.S. to step in quickly with fracking gas or whatever, wouldn't it?
LNG would, where you'd have to get gas in the U.S., you'd have to liquefy it, transport it across. It would be a lot more expensive than Russian gas through a pipeline.
Now, there's another part. There are a lot of other things technically that I've never bothered to try to find out the answers to, but my imagination is when you have a pipeline, you have just basically two ends, one end for input and one end for output. But gas comes from a whole bunch of different places. And what happens? Do they take the gas and do they have to purify it or refine it or do something with it and collect it before they put it in this pipeline? Or how does it work? Because you can't have little spigots running every which direction to every wellhead.
Well, you can think of a gas pipeline as like the equivalent of electricity transmission line. it's a big pipe and you can transport a lot of gas under pressure, like 1,000-pound pressure. And you might have pumping stations along the way. And at the input end, let's say, you need to gather gas. So you might have a lot of small pipelines feeding into a terminal that would then feed into, from individual gas fields. So you may have a big network of pipelines, smaller pipelines feeding into the one big pipeline.
Okay, now that makes sense. But now at the end of these smaller pipelines, are they coming right from the well?
Yes.
It's directly from the well. They don't have to do anything to process it before they put it into the pipeline.
Well, that's an area I had a little bit of experience years ago, but, the natural gas coming out of the ground does need to have some refinement because there'll be some liquids and things mixed in with the gas. But my understanding is that you don't need a big refinery or anything like that. It's easy to clean up the gas that comes out of the ground locally, and then put it into a pipeline and transport it long distances. That's one of the beauties of gas. It's very clean, starting with its coming out of the well.
Okay.
And there may be some what they call gas liquids that you might have to have a cyclone, spin it and separate the liquids from the gas before you put it in the pipeline.
Well, thank you.
Gas is very clean, compared to, let's say, coal and oil.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And now I'm an expert.
So Germany is already, let's say, getting its gas from they probably get some gas from Holland and maybe the North Sea, I don't know. But they get their gas from at least 1,000 miles away in Russia, or a major portion of it. They get their oil from the Middle East, tankers going halfway around the world, or some big number like that. And then they have to go to refineries, and because oil, you can't use crude oil directly. It has to be refined into various products from jet fuel to diesel to oil, to gasoline. So Germany is already, on the fossil fuel side, very dependent upon sources that are quite distant from Germany. And that's what I think, that the world has not dealt with yet on renewables is, in an ideal world, maybe Germany will get a lot of their electricity from Kazakhstan or from North Africa, where, you could have large solar farms in very sunny areas and have transmission lines, which would be the equivalent of a pipeline today, delivering electricity from very far away. You don't have to generate it all locally.
So how much of their energy already is from renewables in Germany?
I don't have the exact number. I think I do have a number that I looked it up the other day. I think they just in 2020 had their renewable electricity, wind and solar, equal their fossil fuel production roughly. And now that was a little bit of a fluke because of, with the COVID in 2020, energy demand was down a bit, things like that. But it's a lot. And Germany has done as much or more than I'd say. There'd be very few countries that have done more than Germany, and maybe none, to try to eliminate nuclear power, eliminate coal, and become more dependent on renewables.
Now, that's the other interesting thing to me, is that they're doing this while also giving up on nuclear. Now, they already had some nuclear plants, and they're going to shut them down, right?
Yeah, I forget. They had, let's say, and these are not exact numbers, I'd have to look up, but they had, let's say, a dozen operating nuclear power plants. They shut most of them down. I think they've got 6 still operating, some number like that. And I think the plan is to phase them all out. And then the question is, can they? Can they develop enough renewables? Because the big thing is, is to phase out coal. I think getting rid of coal is a lot more important than getting rid of nuclear right now. Certainly, nuclear's carbon-free, coal is not. But their long-term plan is to become nuclear-free as well as fossil fuel-free. Whether they can do that or not, or how quickly they can do it, is to be determined. So I think, if you look at what they're doing, they've put a lot. Well, first of all, when they absorbed East Germany, they inherited a lot of very polluting Soviet-era factories, and a lot of that has been shut down or eliminated. So they cleaned up a lot when they took over East Germany. Then they've promoted energy efficiency and conservation, which has been, I think I don't have an exact number, but they certainly have gained a lot with efficiency and conservation. And then they've put a big emphasis on generating electricity with renewables and reducing their dependence on coal. What they haven't touched yet is transportation. I think the last I looked, their emissions from transportation only down like 1% or some small amount. And that's to be, that has to wait for electric vehicles. And Germany, Volkswagen is saying they're going to have all of their vehicles be electric in 10 years or some number like that. And I think electric vehicle sales are picking up in Germany.
So now, who is responsible for installing all these stations where people can, refill their electric tanks, so to speak? Is the government doing that, or some private company? How is it going to work?
Well, I don't. The government didn't have to build gasoline stations, anywhere. I mean, as the demand, as automobile use went up and gasoline use went up, people, private enterprise built gasoline stations to fill the demand, and that's a somewhat controversial. I mean, like in the U.S., I have several friends that have electric vehicles, Teslas, Chevy Volts, and Nissan Leafs. They have no trouble charging their electric vehicles. Tesla has its own network across the country, and when you drive a Tesla, your display tells you exactly where the nearest charging station is. And
you mean already that there's enough?
Yeah, and a friend that has a Chevy Volt and a Nissan Leaf. I mean, there's stations. And when I pull into a parking lot in California, there's often 4 or 5 charging stations in it. So this is happening already. Now, the Biden administration says they're going to build 500,000 electric charging stations across the country to promote electric vehicles. And I'm a little skeptical of that. I'm saying, do you need to do that, or will that be something that, will the oil companies get into, as they go green, will they be building will your gasoline stations automatically start showing up with EV charging stations?
And how long does it, I mean, okay.
And a lot of people have them at home. I mean, if you have an electric vehicle, you have a home charging, and it's an electrician coming over and putting it up. It's not a big deal.
Well, I tell you, I live in a high rise, 23 stories, and the underground parking, there's no way I could recharge a car.
Well, I bet.
I just got rid of my car, by the way, because I don't drive anymore. But I don't know how long it'll be before they try to fix it so that people could recharge their cars at night when they're asleep.
Well, I mean, there's nothing that difficult about putting 220 volt in the US, running a cable down into a garage and putting in a dozen, charging stations. I mean, you're running wires. I mean, it's an electrical thing. It's not a pipe with gas in it or anything that's that.
So they won't put one for every parking spot.
Well, I mean, they would if they had all electric vehicles, but I think that, you'd be foolish to put 100 charging stations in your parking garage if you only needed 3. But you can add them as you need them. So I I don't think that charging is going to be a bottleneck for electric vehicle use. You can add a charging station a lot faster than you can build electric vehicles. So
What do they charge you for refilling your tank, so to speak?
I don't know how that works, but electric vehicles, the numbers I've seen, and I'm not an expert, is that, well, first of all, electric vehicles are very efficient. And so you might be getting the equivalent of 75 or 100 miles a gallon. So, you know, it's cheaper to run an electric vehicle than it is to run a gasoline vehicle, and the maintenance would be lower. There's almost no moving parts. You don't have an engine or a transmission.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think, you know, I think charging stations will come, whether the government needs to play a big role in building them or whether that'll happen or some combination of private enterprise and government. But charging stations are not a big deal. I mean, it's a wiring problem.
Okay, that surprises me because I would have thought already that I would be afraid to get out on the road and think, oh my goodness, it's still 100 miles to the next stop where I can get. No.
Yeah, but I mean, people that have electric vehicles, you know, their navigation program tell you where the next charging station is. And, you know, I've had a friend drove his Tesla across the country and back, never had a problem. I mean, the problem is it maybe take you 40 minutes to charge your car, and they go in and have lunch or a cup of coffee. So I haven't had, you know, I haven't heard any complaints about not being able to charge my vehicle. And most of the owners have charging stations at home, so they charge the cars overnight.
Okay, so we've taken a little excursion into
Yeah.
educating me about electric vehicles, which I will never own, but nevertheless, I'm all in favor of them.
Well, you might go to a driverless car, just call up one like an Uber without a driver.
Well, that I would look forward to.
Yeah, that's going to come in time.
But in any case, the Germans are ahead of us. Good for them.
Well, yes, but I mean, they've got a big charge now. Now, what do you want to? I mean, there's some things about Germany we could talk about. I don't know what you want to talk about, but I've got a few things.
I never start with a bunch of questions, but plenty of questions tend to pop into my head as I get to talk to people. No, I don't know. They get some of their energy from Denmark. I think I had heard that Denmark has a lot of wind, and they export.
They
so
do.
Some of the German power is coming really from Denmark. They don't necessarily generate their own.
Well, and Germany's. I mean, Europe has a fairly integrated power system, so Germany could, at certain times of the day, be providing power to some other European country, and at other times they would be buying power. You know, electricity is easy to transport back and forth if the transmission system's there. And so, and that's something we need to do in the U.S. and maybe U.S. and Canada. We need to have, because it's easier to even out supply and demand over a larger area. And so there's a lot of advantages to have a transmission network that will allow you to trade electricity back and forth depending on the weather and time of day and that sort of thing.
How visionary is this? I have heard that some very utopian-minded people are saying that whenever it's sunny on one side of the world, it's dark on the other. So with direct current, you should be able to generate plenty of energy on one side and send it over to where it's nighttime or dark or cold or whatever, and that this long distance transmission of electricity is in the cards. I don't know how visionary is that and how realistic.
Well, I mean, there's a couple things we could mention on that. Right now, there are transmission networks that transmit electricity hundreds or even 1,000 miles or more. So electricity is very, very efficient to transport, and the higher the voltage, the more efficient. And AC power is used most of the time, but from what I understand, and this is not my area, But, when you get up to very high voltage, you go to DC. And so China and the US, and I'm sure other countries, are starting to put in some high voltage direct current where the losses will be even less, so that you can transport electricity a very long distance without any losses. And if I mention one thing, I just read an article over the weekend, was quite fascinating. Australia is building a huge solar farm, and up in the Northern Territories, which, I've been there, it's a pretty sparse area. And they're going to take the power to Darwin on the north coast of Australia, and they're going to supply it to Singapore by an underwater cable.
Really?
And I'm sort of
thinking, visualize it.
Yeah.
Singapore isn't real close. Singapore is thousands of miles away.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I mean, if they can do that, I mean, if you can do that, you could get, electricity from the Sahara to Germany, under the Mediterranean. So, I mean, if we can do the things like that, once you generate the electricity, you can transport it without a lot of losses.
Okay, but you know what? That gives me another bleak scenario. Imagine a war, and they don't necessarily use bombs anymore. They use great big scissors. They go along the bottom of the ocean and go snip.
No, they wouldn't. I don't think they'd do that. You know what they'd probably do? They'd probably hack the power system and shut down the transmission line. They wouldn't need to physically go in and cut the cable. I think when you talk about scary scenarios, cyber attacks shutting down your electrical grid and things like that, they wouldn't need to be that crude.
Okay, all right.
But,
so now we hear about, we've gotten off the subject of Germany, but we can get back on in a minute. I'm just thinking now Biden is talking about this big infrastructure plan. They're talking a lot about the money involved in the allocations and stuff, but I haven't heard them really describe exactly what kind of thing they're going to be doing. But I think when it comes to the electric grid, there has to be one kind of systematic overhaul, isn't there? I mean, a smart grid of it'll be a new technology or something, won't it? What is in, being planned for the improvement of the US electric system?
Well, I think, my impression is that the transmission systems, that's proven technology. They have, like 1,000-volt DC network transmission systems. I mean, we don't have to invent anything to do that. The problem we have in the States is we don't have an extensive enough network. We don't have a national transmission line, a set of transmission lines. In fact, we have a very big network of pipelines. Like in New England, you might heat your house with gas from Oklahoma. But electricity production has been usually a state-to-state deal. And so there's no national regulations that would allow you to easily build a transmission line, let's say from Oklahoma to New England. That has to be dealt with. And so it's not a technical problem, it's a legal, a regulatory one. And like California, we import 20% of our electricity from other states. So
where?
Yeah.
Where do you get it?
Well, we get a lot of it's from the northern states. I mean, probably some of it comes from the Columbia River, where you have some hydro. So it comes from a lot of different places, depending on the time of day and things. So, California already imports 20% of our electricity. I think we should not be dependent upon that. I mean, why should another state build a power plant to feed California? I mean, maybe there's a commercial reason. But, the big thing with California, just using that as an example, is where we will be able to get the best wind and solar is not next to Los Angeles. So we're going to have to build a lot of transmission lines in the state to transmit renewable energy from where it's best produced to where it's needed. And then we also need to have a more robust connection to the rest to, let's say, regional connections. And then I think that parts of it, we won't need it, but let's say if you're in Chicago or New York, you may want to have a national transmission network where you could get power from, California. That's technically feasible. So I think there's a good role for the government to come up with a system solution. What is the national network we need and the regional networks we need to optimize production and distribution in the U.S. So I would hope the federal government does a good job, because that would be a big plus.
Okay.
But it's not a technical problem in my mind. The big issue in California is right away. Our bullet train is being held up because we, can't get the right of way, and that's a state responsibility. And
Now, can't they use eminent domain?
well, I asked my lawyer friends about that, and that yes, we can, but it still gets tied up in state court. We are in a situation where, too many people can say no. You get environmental lawsuits, and you get people, lawyers can make a lot of money suing somebody for something. And for the bullet train, which is in my mind scary, because I'm saying, why do we think we can do a better job implementing renewable energy than we have with the bullet train?
Okay, well, now you're going into an area where I don't know much yet, but I have a kind of an agenda thing. I want to know a little bit about a bullet train problem in California, because we have here in Canada a situation where the Canadian government has, I don't know why the government's involved, but there was a contract between Canada and Saudi Arabia to provide armored personnel carriers on a huge scale. So it's a massive project. They took over what had been a train factory. I don't know whether they were building locomotives or the cars for trains, but it was a train factory in London, Ontario, and they converted it to making these armored personnel carriers, which of course Canada doesn't have much need for, but you can imagine what the Saudis are doing with what they get from us. Yeah. I don't know how much has been proved, but what they're doing in Yemen is not very nice. So what we, a lot of us have been demanding or pressuring the Canadian government, and the majority of the Canadian population would like to have it, the contract terminated. But of course, that would lose a lot of jobs, and there'd be some sort of fee for breaking the contract if the government decided they wanted to do it. So I was talking to somebody the other day about, well, why, my belief is that if you're going to tell somebody they have to cut down or shut down some kind of operation, either because it's too militaristic or politically they're supporting the wrong guy in a war, or because of global warming, for whatever reason you think you need to shut down an operation, in the same sentence you ought to say, and here's what we think we should be building instead. So let's take your factory or your operation and convert it to something that is desirable. So I was talking to a guy and saying, look, what would it take to turn that thing back into making trains? Because there was a conversation 5 years ago about having Canada put in a bullet train between Montreal and Toronto, or even beyond, maybe up toward Quebec City and all the way down to London, Ontario, or Windsor, or Hamilton, the Detroit border, and so on. Could be really, I don't know what they might do with it, but it would certainly be wonderful. And there was talk about it, and it just sort of petered out. I haven't heard anybody talk about it lately. So I was thinking I ought to try to get that thing going again, see if I can talk to people about, hey, why don't we say to the Canadian government, we want you to not only shut down this armored personnel carrier factory, but turn it over back into making trains, but this time make a bullet train. So
well, let me comment, because I think we need to get back to Germany, because there's a couple of hot issues we need to talk about.
Absolutely. All right.
My argument on that is, businesses go out of business all the time, and for good and bad reasons. And I think that the market, let's say you shut down that factory, maybe there's no use for it. And I think some other entrepreneuring guy will build, maybe take it over, and who knows what they'll make there, if anything. Maybe you don't need factories, as many factories as you have today. But I just think that a lot of times we can't foresee what some enterprising person's going to do, and I'm also against subsidizing something and saying, well, we can't shut it down because of the jobs we'll lose. Well, uh, let's do something with the people that are unemployed, but let's not continue to subsidize something we don't need. But I mean, that's a different issue. But just on the bullet train, I mean, this is 7 years after the construction contract was issued. We still haven't gotten all the land, and that's a state responsibility, and so you're saying, gee, if you can't do that, can you get the right of ways for transmission lines and other things? So I'm a little worried about that. Mm-hmm. But coming back to Germany, there is an issue. They back in, let's say, 2000 or so, or sooner than that, went into a big push to get rooftop solar and things like that. And they gave a lot of financial incentives to people to do that. And they did a great job. I mean, they've got a lot of rooftop solar in Germany, even though it's not a nice sunny place. And they set it up so that people would get paid for their solar. And then what's happened is they've produced a lot of electricity, but because of the way they set it up to pay for it, they've got the highest electricity rates in Europe. Denmark is about the same. And their electricity rate, I looked recently, was something like 37 cents a kilowatt hour compared to 13 cents in the US average. So what it's done is created very expensive electricity. And this gets to an issue that I'm a little worried about is, the electricity ratepayers, as we electrify our economy to be less dependent upon fossil fuels, we can't put all of the cost on the electricity ratepayer because electricity gets too expensive, and that takes away the incentive to replace natural gas with electricity, for instance.
And what else is there? If not, somebody's got to pay for it.
Well, I mean, somebody's got to pay for it, but, I mean, should that be, let's say we go to electric vehicles, we put in all kinds of charging stations. I mean, should there be some way to try to charge the transportation industry rather than the electric industry for that transition? We've got to watch. I mean,
like Ford Motors would be paying, even though they just build the cars, they would pay for some of the
Well, maybe Ford. Maybe there's a tax on EV sales. Maybe we won't with an EV. You won't have gasoline taxes anymore. So that's a major source of revenue for highway maintenance. Mm-hmm. And so maybe you need to just tax people on the mileage they drive. Find some way to do that. But my concern in Germany is an example of moving to renewables. In a sense, it should be cheaper electricity. But in Germany, it's gotten to be a lot more expensive, and half the cost of their electricity is not the cost of the electricity, but it's the fees added to it.
Like what?
What they call a feed-in tariff. I pay you for the electricity, and then you allocate that cost over all of the ratepayers. And so and I think it's a fairly complicated system that I don't fully understand myself. But the way they have charging people for electricity, it is very expensive in Germany, and that's obviously hurts industry. It hurts homeowners and others.
But then the best solution would be to find a way to do it cheaper, create it so it's not as expensive.
Well,
you're not saying that. Is there any technology coming along that will make the production of electricity less expensive?
It is. I mean, solar and wind is is cheap and getting cheaper. So it is.
That's what I'd heard. So why is electricity more expensive then?
I mean, it's more expensive because of the fees you add to it. In California, for instance, we have very expensive electricity, much higher than the national average, and it's it's distribution, it's the rate you pay to your utilities. We need to make sure that the low cost of electricity generated by solar and wind gets passed on to the customer, because that gives them an added incentive to switch from natural gas to electricity, let's say for
So
home
you
heating.
say it's not now being.
Yeah, not now. No, we have to be sensitive to how what we do affects the price of electricity, because it should be getting cheaper in my mind.
I see. Okay.
Because solar and wind is cheaper than coal and nuclear and other sources. But if because of the way you charge for it, the fees you add, if that makes electricity more expensive than it needs to be, you'll delay any transition. And you'll be penalizing the electricity user rather than charging, let's say, the vehicle owner.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Okay, now have the Germans really kept to their initial aspiration of not only going sustainable, but going anti-nuclear? I see what looks to me like more wobbling in the direction of pro-nuclear around in the conversations I overhear here, but I'm not in Germany. But this small modular reactor business, which people are promoting so much, I don't, I've seen a lot of criticism of it, that it's not such a great thing, and it's in fact a very bad thing. But you see more people saying, "Oh, we really are going to have to do that, and they're going to be safer, or they're cheaper, or something or other." And I don't know, but my guess is that public opinion may be moving back toward pro-nuclear because of that, the promotion of these small modular reactors locally, and people I know anyway.
I don't think
is that true in the U.S.? I mean, I think the Biden thing doesn't rule out nuclear at all.
Well, I spent a lot of, an early part of my career in the Navy's nuclear program, and then in commercial nuclear power. And, I had a big debate recently on nuclear. Bill Gates in his book says you may need nuclear for some base load, some dependable electricity, but it's not the solution. And I think things like
really, I must eat my words then, because I've been saying that he's pro-nuclear. Maybe for what you said.
No, one of his investments is in a company that's coming up with a new design for a nuclear power plant. But what he says, and I agree with this, is if you can store enough electricity cheap enough, you don't need nuclear, because the big problem with renewables is their variability. And so you need, and I've been studying this quite a bit, you need to be able to store a lot of electricity when the sun is shining and when the wind is blowing. And that's to vary day to day, hour to hour, day to day, and even month to month variation. Because like in California, in winter, solar and wind will produce 40% less energy than they will during the summer.
Even in California, okay.
Even in California. And so what's being looked at is a combination of large-scale utility-scale batteries, not the lithium-ion batteries that you use, because a utility battery doesn't move. It can be very heavy. So there'll be some combination of large utility-scale batteries that may be needed for, let's say, hour-to-hour variations. And then they're looking at green hydrogen for long-term storage. If electricity is cheap enough, you can produce a lot of hydrogen gas, which we talked at one of our sessions. When you burn hydrogen, you don't get any CO2, you get H2O, which is water. And so I think that the studies that I've been reading in the States are betting a lot on utility scale batteries and hydrogen as a storage medium. And there are some projects being implemented in the US using hydrogen as a storage media, but not on the scale we need. And so if you can store enough electricity with batteries and hydrogen that you can smooth out hour to hour, month, day to day, month to month variations between supply and demand, then you won't need nuclear. So in my mind, nuclear is competing with storage, not with direct production. Yeah.
That figures, but I haven't heard people jumping up and down with joy over any breakthroughs that seem to suggest storage is now an easy and cheap.
Oh, it's not an easy one. I mean, if batteries and hydrogen prove to be the right solution, that'll be a massive effort to put in the capacity we need. And then would need hydrogen pipelines. But if it's cheap enough, hydrogen could be used like you use natural gas today. You could pipe it into your house. You could use it for heating. You could use use it to power a fuel cell to produce electricity. You could have hydrogen powered vehicles instead of battery powered. So, but I mean, this is all early days. Yeah.
Help me with this, because I'm in chemistry, I think I got a D in high school. So I never got any better either. So
I want to talk about nuclear too. So let's make sure we have a minute or two for that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we can get back to nuclear for sure. But I'm thinking hydrogen, is that what the Hindenburg was?
Yes.
Hydrogen. So it's a very flammable thing. Now, what's helium? Because I'm thinking of something that will float.
Helium is an inert gas that does not combust.
So you could use helium if you had it. So for things that float. If you want balloons, helium will do it, right?
Yeah,
okay.
Putting hydrogen in a dirigible was creating a bomb.
So they shouldn't have done it. But why would piping hydrogen into your house be any different?
Well, I mean, it'd be the same as natural gas. I mean, natural gas will explode. And so will gasoline. So I mean, if you want the energy, you have to have a combustible medium. Yeah, I mean, So I mean, hydrogen would be no less safe than, let's say, natural gas.
All right. I hereby authorize you to get back to nuclear. If you
Well, I mean, nuclear is getting a lot of talk as people start to, like Texas, where they had their grid go down, and people saying, "Oh, it's nuclear." I mean, that was a problem. We need to get a stable electric grid, and they had no storage in their grid, and so. If we're going to have an economy based on renewables, and I think we have to do it, that's the only way we can get rid of fossil fuels, then you're going to have a lot of storage. And that's going to be batteries. It looks like it could be hydrogen. And then you may need some nuclear to provide a steady source of some power. That's to be determined. But, nuclear power is not a technical problem. It works. The problem is economics. I mean, right now, nuclear power plants are being shut down in the U.S. because the electricity they produce is more expensive than natural gas. So they're shutting them down based on economics. And there's a public acceptance issue. There's a politics issue. Right now, we haven't figured out in 50 years what to do with spent nuclear fuel in the U.S. It's not a technical problem. It's a political problem. Where do you put it? And not in my backyard. So nuclear's got a lot.
To me, the worst threat is, as long as you keep on producing stuff like plutonium, there's somebody who's going to want to get hold of it.
No. I don't know. I think Russia has. I mean, there's a lot of people who can produce plutonium for bad reasons, but if we had a fuel cycle or recycled it, you would take the plutonium, mix it up into the fuel and burn it in another reactor. I mean, you don't have to, that plutonium does not have, it's not going to go on the open market, so to speak.
Well, I don't know. I know enough people who really, really worry about that. I had a conversation.
But
Frank von Hippel wrote a book recently about how we should absolutely forbid reprocessing. Because
well, I mean,
as long as it's all mixed in together, it's not that bad, because it's hard to, it's hard for them to get hold of it and use it if it's all a big messy goo. But if you reprocess it, it becomes a real threat to, for somebody to want to use it for a weapon.
I mean, anything, you can use a lot of things for bad as well as good purposes. But if the U.S. was reprocessing fuel, the plutonium would not get loose. Now, with Pakistan or Iran or North Korea or Russia are with nuclear reactors, they get their hands on plutonium. They're not getting
a small modular reactor, as I understand it, really involves a type of reprocessing right there.
No, they don't.
Well, they don't like the word, but apparently it does. They have to separate the stuff out, and it happens there.
I mean, well, a small modular reactor is basically the same reactor you're using. It's a modern version of what the Navy has been using for a long time. And the big thing they say is that they can make them cheaper because they can produce them in a factory, and they're going to be small enough to ship to the site, so you don't have to build them in the field. But I've read that the electricity they produce will be more expensive. There's a whole issue of they still need cooling water. They still burn nuclear fuel, and they will have spent fuel that has to eventually be disposed of. There's a whole issue of containment. They do not have the same kind of containment structures that we have for large nuclear power plants. And they say, oh, but they're safer because of the design. Well, are you going to convince the public that you can live near one because it's supposedly safer? I think that small modular, I just did a little calculation in the US. We would have to build, let's say, 40 to 100 new nuclear power plants if we just wanted to continue to produce 17 or 18% of our electric power by nuclear, because we're going to all of our reactors today on average are 40 years old. They need to be replaced, plus new ones. And if you build a 1,200 megawatt reactor, and then you say, I'm going to use small modular reactors, I need 10 to 20 of those to make up for one big one. Where are you going to put them? I mean, you've got to assume that they'll be more easily sited, but they still need cooling water. They still produce spent fuel. There are, and then if you perfected it tomorrow, how fast could you build them? Could you, as we need to double and triple the amount of electricity we produce to, for instance, electrify transportation, how many of these do you have to produce, and where would you put them?
All of those questions.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of loose talk about nuclear, and without a lot of discussion of the practical alternatives. And it's not technical. Small reactors work, big reactors work. It's an issue of economics, an issue of politics, it's an issue of public acceptance.
It's an issue of safety.
Yeah, it's not a technical issue.
Well, safety is a technical issue, because
Yeah.
there is no technical solution to the problem. So if you could make plutonium and uranium, if you could neutralize them immediately because you had a new technology, then the problem would go away, I guess. But it doesn't go away because so that makes it a technical issue. Okay.
Well, my guess is that we should not shut down reactors that are operating safely today until they're completely used up, because
I think that's what's going to happen. And maybe I think most people would agree that we can't afford to shut them all down now.
Right.
Because we have to have them. But but it's different from saying we need more of them.
Well, and I think that we may find, I'm hoping that battery power and hydrogen and renewables will be able to produce steady power over time. And we won't need nuclear power.
Okay, we're on the same side. It's nice to have one small fight with you every time, but
Yeah.
it's even nicer if we wind up basically on the same side.
Yeah, but we have, I mean, Meta, where you and I agree, if we want to stop global warming, we have to stop using fossil fuels. We have to do other things in agriculture and things. And the best way to do that is to go 100% renewable. And then we have the big problem there is the variable nature of renewable power. And we have to solve that, with batteries, with hydrogen, with other things. And let's get on with it.
I agree.
Let's get on with it.
Right. All right. It's always fun. So have a good day, a good week, or good, however it will be till I see you next.
I hope this met your expectations.
We will have many more conversations, no doubt about it. It's always fun. So take care of yourself, and I hope you got your shot. Take care.
Both of them over a month ago, so I'm in good shape.
Excellent.